here.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for being here with us this afternoon to participate in this program as part of the Law and Democracy Speaker Series. My name is Jesse Fitzell-Jones. I'm a class of 2027 studying quantitative social science with a focus on government. I'm the chair of the College Democrats of New Hampshire, policy director of the Dartmouth College Democrats, vice president of Alpha Theta Gender Inclusive Greek House, curriculum coordinator at Let Us Lead, and campus coordinator with the Karishma Manzur campaign for U.S. Senate. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's program. Law and Democracy is a series of conversations focusing on foundational laws, policies, and institutions as we approach the semi-quincentennial milestone of the Declaration of Independence. This series builds on the Rockefeller Center's commitment to bringing our community together in discussion with a wide range of experts and practitioners to examine and deliberate on these themes. We are grateful to Dartmouth Dialogues, the Office of the Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, and the Office of the Associate Dean for the Social Sciences for being crucial partners in making this series happen. We would like to welcome our virtual attendees who are joining us today via live stream. For those joining us in person, when we reach the audience Q&A portion of our program, you can raise your hand, and one of our student assistants will bring you a microphone. Please be sure to wait for the microphone before speaking to make sure that everyone in the room and on our live stream can hear you. As a reminder, Dartmouth is committed to protecting free expression and peaceful dissent. We encourage you to ask questions during the Q&A, but ask that you do not interfere or disrupt today's program, which would include preventing attendees from seeing or hearing our guest and moderator, or interfering with our guest and moderator's ability to speak and be heard. This conversation will be moderated by Brendan Nyhan, James O. Freedman, Presidential Professor and Professor of Government. We are honored to be joined today by Congressman Ro Khanna, a United States Congressman from California's 17th District in the heart of Silicon Valley. Congressman Khanna has a vision to build America into a modern manufacturing and innovation superpower, and he partners it with a commitment to passing Medicare for all, a livable minimum wage, $10 a day childcare, and free public college and trade school. He is a progressive with a fresh economic vision. Born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in 1976 to a middle-class immigrant family, Congressman Khanna's faith in America is rooted in his own story. His grandfather was part of Gandhi's independence movement in India, which inspired John Lewis and Dr. King and led to the Immigration Reform Act of 1965, which allowed Congressman Khanna's parents to come to America. Congressman Khanna grew up with an economically mixed community with working and middle-class families. Thanks to neighbors, good public schools and teachers, and coaches who encouraged him, Ro grew up believing that anything is possible in America. After graduating from the University of Chicago with a degree in economics with honors and receiving a law degree from Yale University, Congressman Khanna moved to Silicon Valley, fascinated by the future of tech, but with no money or connections. As an outsider, he ran for Congress at age 27 as the nation's first anti-Iraq war candidate and lost. In the years that followed, he taught economics at Stanford, practiced tech law, worked on Barack Obama's 2008 presidential campaign, and later served as the Obama administration as Deputy Assistant Secretary at the U.S. Department of Commerce. Years later, he ran again on a platform of political reform. He lost that race too. Then, on his third try, this country elected him, an Indian American of Hindu faith, to represent Silicon Valley, the engine of technological innovation for the nation and the world. Once elected, Congressman Khanna became vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus and co-chair of Bernie Sanders' 2020 presidential campaign. Khanna has created thousands of jobs across 13 states, stretching from Nevada to Ohio to New Hampshire, through a national jobs program that connects top tech companies from Silicon Valley to community colleges, historically black colleges and universities, and Hispanic-serving institutions. He has also partnered with the United Steelworkers and industry leaders to introduce legislation to build new, modern steel plants in places like Johnstown, Pennsylvania, that have suffered from deindustrialization. He introduced bipartisan legislation to create a National Economic Development Council to invest in factory towns, rural communities, and cities like Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and Warren, Idaho, set benchmarks for implementation, and simplify the approvals process. Congressman Khanna has a strong record of bipartisan work, including co-authoring the CHIPS and Sciences Act to invest in semiconductor manufacturing and innovation here at home. He has also passed laws to modernize the federal government, protect against cyber threats, create apprenticeships for veterans, and make it easier for the National Guard and Reserve Forces to access disability and pension benefits. This willingness to engage earned him the title of California House Democrat, most likely to get a bill signed into law. He was also awarded the Publius Award from the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress for his bipartisan leadership. As a leading progressive, Congressman Khanna authored the Epstein Files Transparency Act, signed into law last year, has led the effort in Congress to recognize Palestinian statehood, and voted against the $17 billion of aid to Israel in defiance of the Biden administration during the Gaza war, and has been a leading voice in calling for the prosecution of ICE agents that shot and killed Alex Preddy and Renee Good. Congressman Khanna worked with the White House and the Senate to secure the largest climate and manufacturing investment in history as part of the Inflation Reduction Act. He has led the charge to cancel student loan debt, ban members of Congress from taking PAC money or trading stocks, cancel all medical debt, and establish term limits and a judicial code of ethics for Supreme Court justices. Congressman Khanna is proud to call Fremont home, and he and his wife, Ritu, have 2 young children. Please join me in welcoming Congressman Ro Khanna to the stage.
Thanks so much, Jesse. Thank you all for being here. I'm Brendan Nyhan. I'm a professor in the government department, as you heard, and we're very grateful to have Congressman Khanna here. Thanks to all of you for being here, both in person and online. We have lots to talk about. Obviously, it is not a boring time in our country's history, so we're going to try to jump right into some of the most important issues. But I just want to highlight, as I think Jesse's introduction really made clear, how unique Congressman Khanna is in being both one of the most effective legislators in Congress and one of the most publicly prominent. Members of Congress famously are typically show horses or workhorses, and he's somehow managed to do both. If your children are on TikTok, he's one of the few politicians they may have heard of. He has one of the most viewed TikTok accounts in addition to all of the work he's doing on the legislative side. So we're really interested to hearing your thoughts. So I'd like to start with the events of the last 24 hours. Strikes, we have to jump right into it, folks, I'm sorry. We only have so much time with him. Late last night, the US and Israel launched a series of attacks against the regime in Iran. You were already, so folks may not know, you were already calling for a vote under the War Powers Resolution to limit the president's ability to engage in attacks there. I saw you posted a video, I think, this morning calling for that vote to happen early next week, and I want to ask you first, do you think that'll be effective? Second, what do you think Congress could do if that's not effective? And then finally, and maybe the bigger question that folks would like to hear about, how can Congress reclaim its role in the decision about whether to use military force or not?
Well, first of all, Brendan, thank you for moderating this. Thank you for your work on the Constitution and government at a time where so much of the rule of law is under attack. We need people studying it, thinking about it, teaching it, so I appreciate it. An honor to be here at Dartmouth. As I remind people in Silicon Valley all the time, AI actually started at Dartmouth, so Dartmouth has a lot of claims to fame. That's one of them. Jesse, thank you for your great introduction. You're doing a lot of things. I mean, and I appreciate it. It was very kind to read the whole biography. It just made me feel old. I already feeling old with the students, but I appreciate that. I appreciate your leadership. And I was so encouraged. I met with a group of students beforehand, some of these great students at Dartmouth, and I said, how many people want to run for office? And usually no hands go up, but 5, 6, 7 hands went up. And I said, we need that. We need that. So I was really encouraged by the students here. It's a serious time for the country. The president has just launched an illegal, unconstitutional war in Iran. He has betrayed his fundamental promise to the American people. His promise was that we weren't going to get into more of these overseas wars, that he was going to help focus on building manufacturing here, building jobs here, supporting the needs of healthcare and childcare and education of the American people. Our defense budget is 56% of the entire budget, almost $1 trillion of the discretionary budget. He wants to take it to 1.5 trillion, and he's spending billions of dollars on this overseas war in Iran, and he's admitted to the American people, based on reporting, that American soldiers, American service members may die. The reporting is that his own Joint Chiefs and military advisors said that this is not going to be like Venezuela. This is actually something that is going to put American personnel at risk. For what? Why are we engaged in this action? The reality is that there were many other ways to prevent Iran from developing a nuclear bomb. We could have been working with our European allies. We could have been engaged in sanctions. Oman's representative had said that there were progress that was being made in the talks. We could have gotten an agreement even stronger than the JCPOA, and I supported President Obama in the JCPOA. So that's not the reason. And Trump himself had said that he had obliterated the nuclear facility a few months ago when he engaged in illegal strikes. The reason he's doing this is regime change. But the history of regime change has not worked. It did not work in Iraq. It did not work when we did it in Libya and had Gaddafi, got rid of Gaddafi, was doing terrible things to his own people. We had 6 years of civil war. And we're only going to inflame the nationalism in Iran with this approach. That's why Thomas Massie and I have called for a vote on our bipartisan Iran war resolution. Now, some of you, I'm sure, have heard of Massie and my work on the Epstein files, and that got a lot of attention. But our partnership really began based on stopping unconstitutional actions to reclaim Congress's power on matters of war and peace. We built our friendship years ago on trying to stop America's refueling of Saudi planes in Yemen and stopping the Yemen war, which we actually did by passing a war powers resolution. We now have introduced this Iran war vote, and I've tried to get the vote last week. We were unable to do it. It was a shortened week with the State of the Union. I'm confident we will get the vote this week, but it's going to be a hard vote. We have about 4 or 5 Democrats who are on the fence to vote for it, and there are so far 2 or 3 Republicans who are saying they may vote for it. We're trying to build a coalition and to remind the Republicans that many of the MAGA base don't want this war either. And so we'll see how the vote turns out on Wednesday.
Do you think Congress would ever consider limiting spending on the war as a kind of final step you could take if a war powers resolution vote, or you anticipate if you fail on the war powers resolution vote, funding would not be a viable option?
Well, we should consider limiting funding, but that's hard to do. It's harder to do to actually get them to limit funding than to just vote on the war powers resolution. But a lot of this is going to be dependent on what the American people think. And ultimately, if people see that this is making the situation worse on the ground, if they see that a lot of our dollars are going there, if they see that that Americans are threatened or at risk, and I hope certainly that's not the case. I mean, I hope now that we've done it, that I pray for the lives of Americans, and I hope there isn't a terrible consequence. But what usually happens is there's a burst of energy once we do these things, and then we end up regretting it as the consequences are unintended. Ultimately, as Abraham Lincoln said, public sentiment is everything, and a lot of Congress's will depend on how much the American people care and speak up about it. Oil prices will probably matter too, what happens to oil prices. Just out of curiosity, how many people here support the president's decision to strike in Iran? How many oppose? Well, that's one indication in an important state.
Yeah, the political scientist says wait for the polls. You're a member of the House, but you're someone who has been mentioned as a potential presidential candidate. And I want to ask you about executive power. You, of course, serve in the Congress, the Article I branch of our government under the Constitution, the one that the founders really envisioned as playing a leading role in the 20th and especially 21st centuries. That's been less true. And now we're seeing unprecedented expansions in claims of executive power under this president. Democrats in Congress have, of course, largely opposed these from a Republican president, but have struggled to limit the president as much as they might hope. And I want to ask you first how you assess the current moment. How serious are these expansions? in executive power that the Trump administration is trying to regularize? And second, how can they be effectively limited, especially when the question is often most relevant at a time when the power over the presidency changes hands? So Democrats come back into power, a Democratic president is reluctant to tie their own hands, and they fail to act, right? And each party oscillates in its opposition to executive power based on its control of the White House. So we've been in the cycle now for a while. One could argue this is approaching something of a breaking point, and I just wonder how you think about it and how serious your party will be in trying to counter that dynamic.
First, as maybe you could tell from Jesse's introduction, I absolutely love serving in Congress. I think it's an incredible place to be able to represent the entire incredible diversity of the American people, where it's represented there, and to build coalitions to get things done. And he was usually when you reach my level, they omit all your failures, but Jesse didn't. He talked about my failures. But I didn't expect to get to Congress. I was a son of an immigrant. Some people, they grow up, and there's nothing wrong with this. They're 15, 16, they think they're going to be president one day. Most of those people don't end up being president. Bill Clinton's an exception. But in my case, I grew up of Hindu faith and son of immigrants. When I was at 21, I was interning, and someone said, "Oh, you can never get elected, but maybe you should go work on the Hill one day." And then Barack Obama happened, and it changed the trajectory in this country. But partly because I never expected to be there, I think I went there with, wow, this is an incredible honor. I want to try to do everything possible to have an impact in the United States Congress, in the greatest country in the world. Now, your question is right, that there has been the increase of executive power, but this is not a linear line of increase, increase, increase. This is increase, 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 and then Donald Trump has done something totally unprecedented that no modern president has done. He has broken the constitutional order. I mean, he has defied the United States Congress in dismantling agencies with zero congressional authorization and consent, dismantling USAID, dismantling NSF, dismantling NIH. No modern president, Reagan, Bush Sr., none of them would have done that. They may have pushed to get those budgets cut, but they wouldn't have just unilaterally dismantled. He has unilaterally taken actions on the military without any consultation of members of Congress. He's got an agency, an ICE, in my view, that has been acting totally rogue, and the use of the National Guard without consultation of local governors, without any oversight in terms of how ICE agents are operating. And he has thumbed his nose at Congress time and again in his dealings with the constitutional order. And so we are viewing something that is unique in at least modern American history. And I believe that the response to that has to be an energetic constitutionalism. So when the Democrats get into power, they're going to want an energetic sense of our agenda, to deal with the massive economic divides, to deal with the lack of child care and health care and taxing billionaires and making sure that we're dealing with the economic divides, making sure that we have investments in science again and renewable energy. And we need people, leaders in the House, the Senate, presidents who are going to be very energetic, who are going to be engaged, who are going to be pushing things, but with constitutionalism in mind, with a sense that they're going to follow the Constitution like Lincoln did. I mean, like a energetic constitutionalism. And so that means that I don't think a future Democratic president should just get into a war without coming to Congress. I don't think a future Democratic president should just dismantle an agency that they disagree with. I don't think a future Democratic president should send in law enforcement to go after people who may have guns because of their ideological view while not adhering to the rule of law. I think we need an energetic commitment to constitutionalism in this country again.
Thank you. So you mentioned your partnership with Thomas Massie, the Kentucky Republican, that in sponsoring legislation that led to the release of the Epstein files. And I want to ask you a couple of questions about that. But first, I just want to ask you how we got to the point when the Congress is so intensely divided on so many issues that you were able to not only pass that legislation, but in an absolutely overwhelming votes, more than 400 votes, I believe, in the House
Yeah.
for final passage, right? So how do the politics of that issue transform? We've seen it's so hard to go against your party on so many issues in this country. Why do you think that issue is different?
Because of the survivors, because people met with these incredibly courageous women who came to the Capitol, met with me, met with Thomas Massie, met with Marjorie Taylor Greene, met with Lauren Boebert, Nancy Mace, and they told their stories of being sexually abused and raped at the age of 15, 16, having to recruit other junior high and high school girls to take their place because they feared the consequence of further abuse if they didn't do that. They talked about a network of powerful people who participated and enabled Epstein to do this, about how when they would call the police or FBI, nothing happened. And people thought that initially that Massie and I were dealing with a conspiracy theory. And now they understand, because half the files have been released, that this was an indictment of the governing class in this country. Some of the most powerful people in Silicon Valley, in Hollywood, in finance, in politics, thought there was nothing wrong hanging out, doing business, going to the island of a convicted pedophile. Over 1,200 survivors. And I believe the American people were horrified. I've taken to calling this group the Epstein class, thinking they're above the law, using wealth and power to be above the law. And they were outraged by it. And we had 2 press conferences on the House Capitol steps with these brave survivors. And that's what started to move the House. And then once we got the House to build the coalition, Donald Trump realized that we were going to get 70 Republicans to vote in defiance of him. And he said, no, let me get it to the front of the parade. So he said, okay, I'm going to sign the law. I still don't think he realizes it's my law. Maybe, he signed a Democratic law. But I didn't get invited to the signing ceremony. But he signed the bill, and the Senate, he thought the Senate would amend it, but they didn't want to go against these survivors. And people say, well, will we get the rest of the files? Well, people didn't think we'd get anything when we started. We've gotten 50%, and now you have Republicans like John Kennedy calling for the release of all the files. The public pressure is going to continue, and this is about restoring trust in our democracy. If we have elite impunity in this country, we're not going to build the trust that's necessary to have a strong democratic project. So I'm committed to seeing justice. Thomas Massie's committing to seeing justice, and I believe we will get there.
So picking up on that point about rebuilding public trust, I think that the Epstein files really are shocking in the extent of the impunity and the number of powerful people who are connected to him. I wonder how you think about the long-term effects, though, of this strategy and the extent to which it might set an uncomfortable precedent. So a prominent former federal prosecutor just wrote an op-ed in the New York Times saying that dumping raw investigatory material online is a really dangerous precedent to set. You know better than most folks in this room as a lawyer how much power prosecutors have. And I wonder how you think about this. Is this kind of a one-off? How can we make sure that prosecutions are carried out in a careful way and we don't just get this kind of dumping process repeating in the future?
Well, it's a very thoughtful point, and it was the best argument against the release of the files, which is that the Justice Department policy is that you don't release publicly information unless you charge someone, because you don't want to destroy someone in the court of public opinion if they haven't had due process and been charged. And that is the norm, and it should be the norm. And it took a law of Congress to overturn that policy. Now, why was that law justified in this case? Because you had, in 1996, women complaining to the FBI about being raped and abused at 16 and 17, and the FBI did nothing. And for 30 years, these people have been denied justice. And Epstein got a sweetheart deal in 2008, and then he got another deal in 2019. And none of his co-conspirators have been prosecuted. And none of these other men have been investigated. Les Wexner, who's so tied in the recruiting of these girls, allegedly, in Ohio, hasn't been asked questions by the FBI or the Justice Department. So in my view, in Massie's view, the justice for survivors denied justice because of a system that had been corrupted necessitated the release of all of these files. But that is an extraordinary circumstance for justice denied for these survivors. That doesn't mean that the Justice Department policy should change on a case-by-case basis. And it's very hard to pass something through the Congress and Senate and have a president sign it. So that should be the bar. If there's another matter that has that kind of weight where you can get that kind of support, fine. But not on a case-by-case basis.
Okay. So as you heard, as folks heard in Jesse's introduction, you represent a district that includes much of the Silicon Valley. You are also co-chair of Bernie Sanders' campaign. That's an interesting and unusual combination. So you're representing a district that includes many of the AI companies that have become so prominent and influential. And I want to ask you about the conflict we've seen taking place this week between the Department of Defense, the so-called Department of War, and Anthropic over the contractual requirements that Anthropic demanded as part of its contract with the DoD, saying that that there should be a legal requirement that it couldn't be used for fully autonomous weapon systems or domestic mass surveillance. And OpenAI has now signed some sort of a similar contract. Obviously, this just happened, so I don't expect you to tell us every detail, but I wonder what your thoughts are on how we should think about this precedent. Should companies have that much leverage over the government on the one hand? On the other hand, how worried are you about companies in your district being targeted the way that Anthropic now is?
Dario Amodei from Anthropic is totally right. And I'm glad he showed some courage in standing up to Donald Trump. I'm waiting for the courage of some of the other tech leaders and private sector leaders in America. I'm waiting for the courage of some of the folks who came as immigrants, the CEOs of these big companies sitting around Donald Trump, and the word immigrant doesn't come out of their mouth. You know, after Charlottesville in the first term, a lot of business leaders spoke out. Where are the business leaders in this country speaking out against what happened to Alex Preddy in Minneapolis? We have seen too much cowardice from private sector business leaders in America at a time where we need more courage of people speaking out with moral clarity. And Dario has courage. He said, very simply, I don't want AI used to have mass surveillance against Americans. And I say, well, the Fourth Amendment protects against that. Well, the Fourth Amendment protects against someone going to your house and taking your things. But the Fourth Amendment, as the courts have seen it, does not protect right now against building social media profiles and collecting data on Americans. And Dario said, not with my technology. You know, other tech companies are saying, well, we're going to be protected because of the Fourth Amendment. That's not enough. I believe that we need to be protected so that your data belongs to you. I introduced an Internet Bill of Rights back in 2018 to say people should have autonomy in their data. Your data belongs to you, not to the government or the private sector. So Dario was right in demanding that, and he was right in saying that we shouldn't be killing people without a human being making a decision. You really want AI deciding whether we should strike some site in Iran without any human judgment in that process? Right now, we have a lawyer there, sitting there, a general. They have to have a process before there's a strike. And they still make mistakes like they did in the Caribbean with what happened with the boat being struck and those two people who may have been unarmed being killed. That was after a human process. AI can't be making those decisions. And so, you know, other companies are saying, well, as long as there's responsibility or accountability. That's different than a human being needs to make the decision. It can't be AI makes the decision and some general is ultimately accountable. We should have it very clear that a human being has to make a decision before someone is killed. And so I will continue to stand up for the humanistic use of AI, for some guardrails and principles around how it's used, and then we can discuss the jobs issue, which is the most significant challenge. But I stand completely with Dario on this.
Well, I was going to ask you about the jobs issue. So in a speech at Stanford last week, which you can watch online, you talked about 7 principles for democratic AI, a series of...
And I talked about Dartmouth's AI at Stanford.
He did actually talk about Dartmouth, yes. I noticed that and I appreciate it, for the record, yes. He's not just saying it here, he said it there. So you offered these 7 principles for democratic AI. this sweeping set of proposals that included protections against mass displacement of people like truck drivers, required bargaining with workers, and so forth. And I want to just kind of get a sense of you, how you're thinking about this philosophically. And I want to kind of offer two stories one could think of as analogies to the moment we're facing. One is, in the aftermath of the Industrial Revolution, regulations were created to make the harsh conditions of that time more humane. The social welfare state is built in Western Europe and the United States, right? Many of those things we now take for granted. At the same time, if you might think about regulations in Europe, which are causing many of their most talented people to come here to start companies. It's harder to start companies there. They face more intense regulation. And in fact, it's very hard to fire workers, which means they're reluctant to start companies there in the first place. So I wondered how you think about those kinds of trade-offs, because one way to think about displacement is it's in part a function of productivity improvements, right? And we wouldn't be as rich of a society if we didn't have those productivity improvements. At the same time, we need to take care of people who are being displaced. So I just want to, if you could tell us a little about your thinking on this and how you weigh those trade-offs.
Very thoughtful question. First, we need the most patriotic, largest jobs program in the United States of America since we've had in the New Deal. So I asked a group of Stanford students earlier, some of them are here, I said, how many of you are concerned about getting a job? 90% of the hands went up. At Dartmouth. I mean, this is a top 10 university in the world. Imagine the challenge for someone who doesn't go to college or who may not go to as prestigious a university. The Stanford papers show that already 16% job loss for young folks 22 to 25 if they're in a job that is AI exposed, coding or something in customer support or services. So we should take a page out of Roosevelt's book with the Civilian Conservation Corps. I call it the Future Workforce Administration. The federal government should hire young people to either serve in their communities, to be teachers, to be childcare workers, to be counselors, to help rebuild towns, rebuild factory towns that have been deindustrialized, or come to the federal government to do moonshot projects in renewable energy, in biotechnology, in ethics in AI, in making government serve people more. We had a crisis in this country of globalization where we watched factory towns be hollowed out and blue-collar jobs were lost and we didn't do much, and now white-collar jobs are being threatened. And the billionaires continue to make a lot of money, 3 times the wealth inequality as the Gilded Age. I believe the time comes for the most patriotic, boldest jobs agenda with the federal government helping create these jobs, and then people can transition into the private sector. Second, we need to be protecting against mass displacement. That doesn't mean that you're inefficient in productivity. In the Industrial Revolution, when the first 60 years, when you had productivity, when you had technology simply displacing workers, yes, you helped consumers and you helped the capital class, but you weren't totally increasing productivity because you weren't making those workers more productive. The best is when technology actually increases worker productivity, when it's used not to replace workers, but to increase worker productivity. And I think we need the tax code steering towards making technology that's actually going to enhance worker productivity and making sure that human beings stay in the loop in many jobs so that you have the adoption of this technology without taking away 4 million truck drivers or having mass unemployment in particular places. And that's why I say I'm not an AI accelerationist or an AI doomer. I'm an AI democratist. We've got to do it in a way that helps working and middle-class folks and not just have all the profits end up in the hands of a few billionaires in my district.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to turn to questions from the audience. So please do put your hand up. As always, we're going to prioritize student questions when possible. And of course, please state your statement in the form of a question, right? Like you're on Jeopardy. Okay, only people my age will get that. Oh, please, go ahead.
Okay. Hi, Congressman Khanna. Thank you so much for coming in. So my question is with regards...
Tell me your name and if you're at school or so. Just one sentence about... You don't have to do as long a bio as Jessica, but you know.
I'm Oscar. I'm a freshman.
Yeah, okay, great.
Okay, so my question is with regards to the Epstein files. With the last wave of releases, there were a lot of victims who got exposed in the files, and likewise, there were a lot of perpetrators or co-conspirators whose names were redacted. So going forward with like the next wave of Epstein releases or future like public data dumps like that, What steps is Congress going to take to ensure that victims are safe and that perpetrators are held accountable?
Well, I appreciate that. They broke the law. We said they have to protect victims' identity and that they can't be protecting perpetrators. That was in the law that Massey and I wrote, if you read it. And Massey and I went to the judge, Southern District of New York, Judge Engelmeyer, and said, appoint a court master, a special master, so that this doesn't happen. The judge is a very thoughtful judge, and he ruled against us not because he disagreed with us substantively, but he didn't think we had standing, since we said you have to bring a lawsuit if that's what you want. And we're considering legal options. But that's what should have happened. There should have been a special master. And at the very least, the Justice Department should have consulted the survivors' lawyers. They never did. The survivors' lawyers offered to meet with them. Massey and I offered to meet with Pam Bondi, Todd Blanche, not because they owe us a meeting just because we authored the law, but because we knew the survivors' lawyers. We said, let us help facilitate the survivors' lawyers so you don't make these mistakes. They didn't do that. And this is what they've done now, and this woman's allegations against President Trump, and I don't know the merits of the allegation, but the fact that she made allegations that she was allegedly sexually assaulted by Donald Trump when she was 13, and they have one witness interview, and that they have not released 3 of them, concealed them, it's a blatant violation of the law, and it looks like a cover-up. So what we need is transparency. And this is the first issue that is hurting Donald Trump with his MAGA base, because he promised them transparency. He promised them he was going to hold the elites accountable, and he is not. He's failing them. I believe when history is written, they will see the Epstein Transparency Act passing as the turning point in Donald Trump's presidency, the first time he's started to lose the MAGA base since he came down the escalator, and the first time Democrats have finally found a way of engaging MAGA's base on an issue which we can all agree, that there should be transparency, that we should protect young girls, that elites shouldn't be above the law.
Hi, I'm Jagger, 28. My question for you is that in the Supreme Court, we recently saw a ruling where Trump's tariffs from the executive branch were struck down, and 2 of the 3 justices who he appointed voted against him, which is kind of the first time we've seen this. Do you think that marks a turning point in the executive power that Trump has been pushing?
Yes. Now I don't trace it all back to Epstein, but there is a sense where when we passed the Epstein Transparency Act and Republicans defied him in the House and in the Senate, and people were politically able to live to tell about it, that people said, oh, okay, you can stand up to the president. He's not a king. And his numbers have started to decline. And don't tell me Supreme Court justices don't look at the poll numbers. I mean, they do. They know that the president is weaker today. And I am glad they finally found the courage to stand up for the rule of law. That's another thing where he has totally defied the Congress. I mean, just putting in tariffs without any constitutional authority. And not even having the humility when he had a ruling against him. He says, okay, I'm just going to do it with some other statute, which he has no constitutional power to do. But the American people are seeing that he is flailing around and engaged in an unconstitutionalism that they find very, very disturbing. And I do give the Supreme Court credit for standing up on that. I believe it marks a turning point.
Thank you. All right. I'm going to demand that one of my outstanding female students raise their hand. There's research on this. Okay.
Now, are we going to get funding cut for DEI like questioning? I just want to know.
Turn off the live stream. Anyone? Oh, thank you. Please.
I wasn't your student, but I was a student in the government department. So Karen Leo Hill, executive counselor for District 2,
for your
and
service.
it's really nice to have you here.
Thank you. Good to see you again.
And so I am I'm the only one of 5, the only Democrat on the 5-member executive council. In New Hampshire, we also have a Republican governor. We also have significant Republican majorities in both the Senate and the House. I'm wondering, you also are in a minority in Congress. Can you talk a little bit about how you are able to be effective while being in the minority?
Well, I appreciate your effectiveness as the one person on the Executive Council who's a Democrat and standing up particularly for workers' rights and labor rights. In my approach, I have two principles. One, I try not to personally insult other people in Congress. I mean, I don't understand what this obsession is with politicians suddenly cursing and thinking it makes them eloquent. The reality is people could, I'm not perfect, people curse in their private lives, but why would you want to model that in public? Why, imagine if Dr. King, instead of giving eloquent speeches about what racism was wrong, had just engaged in an emotional rant. It doesn't move people. And so my approach has been that I will stand up for my convictions. I will defend unpopular positions in the polls, whether that's trans rights that may not poll well, or whether it's an issue of immigrant rights where I voted against Lake and Raleigh. I will never cede my ground on what I believe. But I try not to be gratuitously insulting on social media or on the floor of other people's character and motives. Now, I'm sure I've slipped if someone goes and looks at my feeds. But by doing that, then you can build relationships where you can go to someone and say, okay, we disagree on 90% of things, but maybe there's some place we can agree. Thomas Massey sends me his Christmas card. It's his family with machine guns in front of the Christmas tree. We don't agree. I'm for assault weapons ban. He's the biggest proponent of the Second Amendment. But we came together on issues of war and peace. We came together on issues of Epstein. Marjorie Taylor Greene and I don't agree on many issues. And if I just called her a conspiracy theorist, et cetera, then she wouldn't have listened or worked together. So my view is we've got to get to the point of conviction-based politics, but some sense of dialogue and civility. One of the articles that did not get much attention, I often go viral on TikTok or things, but I wish if this got like 20 people reading it. I wish the country would have read it. There's a giant in the Congress, and you know him, Lee Hamilton, who served in Indiana. He was on the Foreign Relations Committee for many years. He recently passed away 3 weeks ago, and I was very touched. He wrote, his final op-ed was published, and he said, I wish for the country more friendship. And he said, I've been watching these two young guys. So Massey and I are young compared to what Hamilton was. And I saw that their friendship started years ago when they tried to stop the Yemen war. And they developed the muscle memory to be able to do the Epstein Transparency Act. I'm tired of a country where friends aren't talking to each other because of politics, where families are split up because of politics, where we're not dating people because of politics. I believe that we need to bring this country back together around an ability to participate in the democratic process with decency and civility and aspiration. And that's what I try to model in how I act in Congress every day.
My name is Trace. I'm a 29 from Oklahoma. So in a recent interview, Hakeem Jeffries was pressed on campaign finance reform. Essentially, his response was, I will keep funding my campaigns how I would like to, how I have been for the past few years. This is unacceptable to a lot of Democratic voters. You've been willing to call for a change of guard in the Senate when it comes to ineffective leadership like this. I was wondering if that's something you're willing to do in the House as well.
You're going to ask me a tougher question. I'm going to ask me on Meet the Press tomorrow, right? Look, I'll answer your question directly, but let me start with this. I'm one of 10 or some members of Congress who doesn't take a dime of PAC money. I don't take a dime of lobbyist money. I take all contributions or individual contributions. I've worked with Summer Lee to ban super PACs. It's one of the most terrible decisions where these billionaires just can threaten you and say, okay, I'm going to put up millions of dollars and go run someone against you. That's not democracy. And by the way, we should overturn Citizens United, but even under Citizens United, you should not have super PACs. I mean, the maximum contribution an individual can give a member of Congress is $3,500 for a primary. And yet they can go outside and fund millions of dollars for a super PAC. How does that make any sense? You should have the same contribution limits to candidates as you do to these super PACs. So you don't have millions of dollars being poured by billionaires trying to buy elections. So that is the reform that I am pushing for. I believe that there's a growing progressive movement that can build those reforms. Now, in terms of why I had called on Schumer to be replaced, is because I didn't think he fought hard enough in the fight of health care when the health care cuts were taking place. And I respect his service. We worked together on the CHIPS and Science Act. He was a brilliant legislator in terms of getting Biden's agenda through. But he has not been the strong opposition leader that we need, in my view, at this time. Hakeem Jeffries, I think, represents a new generation. I'm more progressive than him, but I do believe that we can build a strong coalition in the House to hold the line on not having new funding for ICE, on fighting for health care rights, on taxing billionaires, and having a bold agenda, and that's including campaign finance reform, and that's what I'm working towards.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Bill Zhang. I'm a 26, a senior here. As someone in Gen Z, as a lot of people here are, we get a lot of news, and our feeds on TikTok and Instagram teach us a lot about daily life. Now, as someone who's gone viral on TikTok multiple times and is the congressman for a lot of AI companies and social media companies, and with the recent new ownership for TikTok in the US, I wonder, how do you see the Democratic strategy on social media should change in 2026 and 2028? Or essentially, how should the Democrats use social media more effectively in these upcoming elections?
One, I think we have to be present everywhere. We have to communicate. We have to go on podcasts. We have to talk to people who have a following on Instagram or TikTok. And we haven't done that as much as we should in the past. We thought, okay, we could go on Face the Nation and talk to the New York Times, and that's enough. And it's not enough. We've got to actually be present, and we've got to be willing to engage. Second thing is, you've got to be willing to take tough positions, because it's unknown. I was coming down here, I saw, they're welcome to ask me questions. Oh, Khanna's doing this war powers resolution, go protest him at this event. Now, some people would say, well, should I really do that? You've got to be willing to take tough questions. You've got to be willing to be clear in your answers. I believe in taxing billionaires. I'm for Medicare for all. I'm for $10 a day childcare. I'm for not getting into war in Iran. You have to be able to say in one sentence, where do you stand? And a lot of times people are like, well, I want the American dream. What does that mean? I love America. What does that mean? Where do you stand on the issues? Where do you concretely come down? Young voters particularly can sense the inauthenticity. They can sense the hedging. I don't want to call out any people, but look at some of the statements on Iran. I'm trying to figure out where they end up standing. It's like procedural gobbledygook. People want to know what's your position. Where are you? And I think that ability to communicate on social media where you stand is what makes things go viral. It's an ability to say, I'm willing to take on power. I'm willing to take a clear stance. I often say courage is the new charisma. How do I know this? Because I've gone viral, and charisma is not the first word that my wife would use to describe me. But I am willing to take on interests and to speak my mind. And I think that ultimately matters with young people.
Hi again. I'm Maya. I'm a freshman from Central Pennsylvania, and I
Yes,
wanted to
we
just.
had a good conversation earlier.
Yes, we did. And I wanted to go back to something you said earlier about facilitating friendship across the aisle. And I was just wondering, being from a really conservative rural part of Pennsylvania, how do you balance wanting to create like bipartisan friendship with wanting to like sort of maintain your morals in situations where you might be interacting with people who don't understand or share your like fundamental human rights views or views on equality? Like, how would you balance those two things?
You know, it's hard. It's not easy. And I've had to balance that my whole life, growing up a son of immigrants, growing up Indian American, growing up of a minority faith in a community that was, at the time in the 1980s, 99% white, and I was one of the only Indian kids in high school. And what I found is that if you stand firm in your convictions, but you engage with people with curiosity and respect, that the American people are pretty decent and generous and understanding. I remember I was once in Ohio, and I was talking about my vision for a new economic patriotism and a Marshall Plan for America and how we're going to create jobs in places like Lorain and Warren, Ohio. And this person says to me, you know, Khanna, I could get behind a Democrat like you. You're a moderate. And I said, sir, I don't want to mislead you. I was co-chair of Bernie Sanders. You know, I'm not, you're going to go Google and they're going to say, this guy's lying to me. I said, you know, he said, no, but I understand that we're on Planned Parenthood and that you're for trans rights and you're for immigrant rights, but you spend so much of your time talking to me about my family and the fact that my kids may not have jobs and what your vision is on creating jobs. So I think if you listen to people and respect where they're coming from with a genuineness, you can hold true to your convictions and still try to find common ground and slowly bring change. But that also means being willing to change on your end on some issue that you may think you don't have the full truth in. And so that's at least been my approach.
Hi, I thought, for some reason, I didn't think I was going to get to my question, but I'm Nardis. I'm a sophomore. I'm from Northern Virginia. I wanted to ask you a question about AI. So you've suggested an AI tax, like due to the mass displacement that will come out of AI accelerating mass displacement. Markets seem to agree with you. This Citrini report that came out earlier this week led to that huge sell-off on Monday. Then Citadel put out that rebuttal that was essentially like, this is just a form of creative destruction, right? And we're gonna see all of these jobs just absorbed by new industries. It feels like a lot of this displacement is being driven by perception of what agentic AI will do rather than what it's actually doing. So I guess my question to you is, how do you tax a perception versus what AI is actually meant to do?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the thoughtful question. I mean, in some cases, agentic AI is leading to job loss. I mean, Jack Dorsey just at his new company laid off 40%, saying these are jobs agentic AI can do. There's job loss that's going to happen in people you lose in Claude. There's job loss that's going to be happening in customer service jobs. So, you know, I know like Joseph Schumpeter called it creative destruction as an economic matter, but in globalization, people say it was creative destruction, and a lot of those communities are still destroyed. And the creative gains have piled up in my district. You know, my district is 1/3 of the entire nation's wealth is piled up in my district, $20 trillion. You know, wild places like where I grew up in Bucks County saw industries leave. I don't believe that a nation can survive with islands of prosperity and seas of despair where people believe that the American dream has declined. So my view is, yes, we want to have AI for helping cure diseases, for helping improve renewable energy, for slashing housing costs, for increasing production. But we've got to do so in a way that make sure that working class people, middle class people still have good paying jobs, and that they have health care, and that they have a good economic prospects. So I've proposed two forms of taxes that can help fund these good jobs programs and health care and child care. One is, which I get the most negativity for my own district, is a billionaire tax. How many people here would be fine with taxing billionaires a couple % every year? You know, unfortunately, you don't all vote in my district. But I tell people, you know, one of my models is FDR, and he was seen as a traitor to his own class. I believe that we need people from Silicon Valley and others saying, look, you can't just have all the wealth piling up here. You can tax billionaires more so that we can have health care and child care and education around the country. And there's going to be something that's, I'll tease an announcement coming up on Monday around that. And then the second point is that a token tax, so what you were saying with AI, which is that you could tax the use of AI by enterprise software and tax that use at a small % that then generates the funds that make sure that we have a strong safety net. But I saw it was the last question, and so I hope I'm not being too long-winded, but I hate senators who go on so long. I thought I'm a House member, so you know, you're limited to one minute. But I've enjoyed very much the conversation. Did you have a final point, or should I wrap with?
You should wrap, and then I'll just close us.
Look, we are living in a new Gilded Age. The top 19 billionaires, which is 0.00001% of Americans, have enough money to buy 12.5% of our GDP. Relative to the size of the economy, this is 3 times the amount that Rockefeller and Carnegie and J.P. Morgan had during 1870 to 2000. I don't believe that a nation is going to survive with the continued economic divides in America. We have got to figure out how every person in this country and every community in this country can have the chance that this country gave me as a son of immigrants, to get a good education in a public school, to be able to go to a doctor when I wanted to go to a doctor, to be able to have a safe community. That's not asking a lot, not when we're producing more wealth than has ever been produced in the history of humanity. And so I have articulated a vision, which I call economic patriotism, which is to say that we should be taxing this extraordinary wealth, billionaires, and be investing it in creating new manufacturing jobs across America, new child care, elder care, and counseling jobs across this country, new tech centers across this country, new sense of trade schools, 1,000 trade schools across America, that we should mobilize America in the economic renewal of every part of our community, that the highest priority of the Democratic Party should be the economic success of every family and every community in America, and that we are the party that did this with FDR, and we need a New Deal for our times, for our moment. And when we do that, we're going to remind this country that it's a great country and it's a decent country. And it's a country that gave a son of immigrants the chance. You know, there was a headline in Britain, because my grandfather, Amarnath Vidyalankar, was in jail with Gandhi, not with Gandhi literally, but as part of Gandhi's independence movement. He was in jail in the 1930s and the 1940s, fighting for independence. And it was, of course, the British monarchy that was ruling. And it said, grandson of Indian freedom fighter jailed by British monarch may bring down British monarchy. Because and I said, I don't think I'm going to bring down the British monarchy, but I said, what a country this is, where a son of immigrants of a different faith can have the chance to represent the most economically influential place in the world, can work for President Obama, can be in the Congress, can pass laws. It is an incredible country. What we're trying to do has never been done in the history of humanity, to be the first cohesive multiracial democracy. I believe if we create basic economic security and opportunity in a modern economy for every family and every community, we will get there. We will start to heal the divides of this country. We will start to be forward-looking and aspirational, and we can reclaim the destiny of this nation that Donald Trump has interrupted.
All right, on that note. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you to Jesse for the introduction. Thank you to the amazing Rockefeller Center staff. Thank you to all the sponsors, and especially join me in thanking Congressman Ro Khanna for being here. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.